1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to count to
5,
60.
6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11,
7,
12, 13, 14, 15, 16,
9,
6,
12, 24,
7,
48, 36.
27. Welcome back to Talking Branches. I am your host, Timmy, and this is Daniel, who is the guest on my show.
I'm the guest on your show.
Thank you for making that clear.
Acknowledging that. Yeah.
How's the Christmas season going for you?
It's good. It's crazy. It's busy. I think
Something happened yesterday that has nothing to do with Christmas. That is exciting.
It's true. Yeah, my wife graduated college.
Yeah.
It's pretty exciting.
Well, it's pretty exciting. It is really exciting.
It's very exciting.
It probably won't be as historically remembered as Jesus' birth.
That is
It might get overshadowed in future generations.
definitely true.
But it is really also very cool.
It's super cool. We're excited.
I was there for the graduation, and it was a Zoom graduation, which I honestly dig because
it wasn't bad.
Yeah, it wasn't bad. I would prefer all.
You've been to a graduation before?
My high school one. I skipped my college one because they said it was going to take like 8 hours, and it was going to be the Moda Center because I went to Portland State, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not about that.
That's a long.
I literally knew nobody.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why would I go to this? So I skipped it.
I actually think that graduation should be spiced up a bit.
Yeah.
Because it's a big celebration.
Right.
It's a big deal.
You just put on these silly hats and throw them up in the air, yelling some cliches, and you listen to the valedictorian give some cliche, things she ripped off the internet. And I don't know. I mean, they were always.
He could be a valedictorian as well,
but I feel like there were always she's when I graduated. But I don't know, girls are smarter than
That's
boys.
because we went to Scappoose.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I did not apply myself. But hey, we're moving on to Christmas. I got to call you out on something because last week, I think it was, I asked you, I said, what is a Christmas tradition you do? And you said we wrap our cupboards.
You're going to bring that up?
In Christmas wrap.
It's true.
And I was at your house yesterday.
Yes. And
the cupboards were bare on the outside.
They were not wrapped.
Right, they were not wrapped.
We have not wrapped our cupboards yet.
Listen, lying is one of the great sins of our lives, as stated by me. And so where is it that, how do you sleep at night?
When you pointed that out, I did point at the numerous picture frames that were hanging on the wall that were
That's
wrapped.
not what you told me your tradition was.
We're on the way towards the tradition of wrapping things. It's a process. You need to enjoy the process and not forsake the journey. Okay?
That sounds very biblical, but
yeah,
I think you should be honest. That's all. If we don't have honesty, what do we have?
What do we have?
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah,
I'll get to wrapping my cupboards for you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, just
Daniel. So we're gonna get into the Talking Branches section of this thing, thankfully.
Yeah.
We talked today, you talked about how God actually needed Christmas, and I liked your take on that. It was interesting. It wasn't what I thought it would be, because I was like, it might be sacrilegious to say that God needed Christmas, because God doesn't really need anything. But the way you put it was quite intriguing. You talked about how if we as humans understood how much God loved us, that maybe we would obey him. Talk a little bit more about that, maybe as it applies to you as a parent, to your children, and how it applies to us as followers of Jesus, or maybe future followers of Jesus.
Sure. I mean, I kind of compared it to, as parents, you've got kids, I've got kids, many of you at home probably have kids, and if you don't, you soon will, and you'll understand this idea that, and we try and even share this with our kids. The reason we have rules in our house is the goal of it isn't control. The goal of it is protection. The goal of it is to, protect our kids from hurting themselves physically, spiritually, emotionally. Like, that's our job as parents. So we're supposed to steward their lives, right? Protect them, guide them, lead them. And I think being a parent, being on this side of being a child, right, now being a parent myself, having been a child, having had parents who had rules, many of which I didn't like, it's really easy now on this side of things to go, man, I get it. Like, I understand why my parents had rules, and I have rules because I love my kids. I have rules because I care about them. I have rules because I want the best for them. I have guidelines. I have things that, we've asked our kids to do and things we've encourage them not to do, not for the sake of control, but for the sake of protection. And so just comparing that now to God as our Father, as our Heavenly Father, looking down on us, and then factor in that He created the universe to work in a specific way. Why, how much more does He look at us and go, man, I want the best for you. And if we only understood, in the same way that if our kids only understood, if we understood how much He loved us and how much He cared, not only would we maybe be more likely to obey, we would trust Him more. We would be able to trust. If we could understand the depth of His love for us, we'd trust Him more than we do right now.
Right, and that was part of the, I guess, the heart of God behind Christmas, sending His Son into the world so we could really understand how much that He truly cares about us.
So we could see it, not just hear it.
Right, and then the expected response, or I guess the hoped response on His part, was that we would then see and taste like the goodness of God and respond to it in a way where we're like, hey, maybe we want to submit ourselves to God, to this higher authority, because of his abundant love. It's not just something that, it's not just like a strict parent who has no reasoning for trying to help, but instead it's a parent who's showing how much they care, how much they love, and then hoping that we respond, accordingly. So that's good. I love how you explain that. Now, you mentioned today that the world was set up. You said you were using that verse from Galatians at just the right time.
Just the right time.
Just the right time. And you went through some details about the world at that moment. I want to talk a little bit more about that. How was the world so well set up? Why is that part so important? Because I find it fascinating. I've heard Andy Stanley do. I heard you talk about it, and just really understanding the context of what the state of the world was at that time. Because if Jesus had showed up, 2,000 years before this time, not our time, but 2,000 years before He did, it may look a little different because word travel couldn't spread, word couldn't spread as much. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so there's this period of time called the Intertestament period. It's between Malachi and Matthew, right? Old Testament, New Testament, somewhere around 450 years of what, the nation of Israel would have called it, silence. God didn't show up. God wasn't speaking. God was absent, seemingly. And during that time, a lot of things happened. Greece came in and kind of overthrew all the powers in the civilized world. They started Alexander the Great, right? They started building road systems. Everyone started to speak Greek. That became kind of the common language, especially for commerce.
And before that, there wasn't really a common language.
No, there was a lot
barriers.
Yep.
Yeah, there'd be huge barriers if you were to go, from Israel, go to Asia Minor or something like that. You start talking to people, it's like you can't.
You'd have to learn their language in a lot of cases. Where Greece was setting up commerce and setting up trade routes and all this stuff, and so they were like, we need a common language so that when a tradesman or someone bringing goods into another city would show up, they could communicate. Rome expanded on that, made the roads safer. They guarded roads, they guarded travel. So you've got this one superpower which creates the opportunity to kind of move about the world in a safer way, in a better way. And while Rome would come in and conquer, they'd also leave a lot of the systems that were set up in those nations intact somewhat, just in submission to Rome. So Rome would still oversee, but there was still a lot of the structure that was set up. So they were leveraging structure that already existed. So when Jesus shows up, and especially when Jesus' ministry begins, you've got roads and seaports all over the civilized world, which made it easy to travel. You've got a common language, so he could show up, and even Paul and Peter, as they're building the first century church, could show up, preach in one language, and a huge majority of the people in that city would understand what they're saying. And there's all kinds of other factors, but those are kind of the bigger ones. Like travel was easy, communication was common and easier than it would have been, hundreds of years before. And so at just the right time, God sends his son when the world is poised for a message to go around the entire civilized world all at once.
Right.
In a way that had never been set up like that
Right.
before.
It wasn't possible.
So,
and it's really interesting. I mean, I don't know so much about the history after that, but I do know that eventually Christianity would become the primary religion of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
Which was obviously more towards Europe, and then as Europe expanded, it became the prominent civilization. At that time, it would become very much so like Christianized, or the gospel would be taught there, and then eventually all the way through to the United States, because it was kind of the primary religion of the Western Europe at that time too. So it's kind of cool to see how that flowed through generations and was able to grow and expand.
It's certainly impacted us, and I think what's so important, and I think we talked about this quite a bit last series, but I think what's so important is so many of our American ideals, our American principles, our American values are not American.
Right.
They're Jesus.
Right.
They're Christian.
In that, yeah.
They're from Jesus coming and saying that all people are equally valuable. It's insane. Oftentimes we forget that, but as an American society, many of our values, if not all of them, come from the gospel and come from Jesus' teachings.
Right.
So it's definitely been an impact.
Yeah, for sure.
Big time.
One of the thoughts that I love that you shared today is not necessarily exclusively a Christian Christmas thought, is very Christian thought, but that Jesus showed up, and he did this in the original Christmas story when he actually showed up on the planet, but when he would eventually die for us. I think it's Romans 5:8 where it says that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us, and that thought always blows my mind. How crazy is it that God, the creator of the universe, would send his son into the world to then die for the very people that would put him to death, and come to us when we didn't meet some benchmark of like perfection as a society. Like, in fact, it was quite the opposite. When the world was dark and there was no hope, he provided hope. Why is that? I mean, I guess the answer may be obvious why it's so mind-blowing, but let's talk about that a little bit, what it meant for Jesus to show up and to die for us while we were in the act of sin, in the act of rebellion.
Of rebelling against him. I mean, this is kind of simplistic, but when you go into Fred Meyer and you pay money for something, you expect something in exchange for that money. It's a transaction. There's a lot of relationships that are that way, where I did something for you, Timmy, so now next time I need something, I'm calling you because there's a debt owed, and there's a transaction that's needed. There's an exchange that's needed. That's pretty normal for us. That doesn't strike us as weird or strange. That's just kind of how we function day-to-day life. Very transactional. The world that Jesus entered into, even more so. Generosity wasn't a thing. It was a requirement. It was give this much to Rome, give this much to the church, and that's just the way it was. Jesus comes, and Paul's highlighting this. He demonstrated our love for us in the fact that he gave before he ever knew, or without any guarantee of anything in exchange. In fact, you could easily argue, because he's God and all-knowing, that he gave knowing in fact that many would not return. It would not give anything up in exchange, would not even be grateful for the sacrifice that he made. And that is extraordinarily contradictory to the world we live in.
Right.
It's foreign to us. It's not a natural thing for us to give without expecting anything in return.
Right.
And then to amplify that even more, it's not even that he knew that many wouldn't return anything in exchange. He knew that many would reject his sacrifice, would reject his gift. And even despite that, he said, I'm taking it on.
Yeah.
I'm stepping into the gap for people who will not just not notice it, but for people who will openly reject the gift.
Right. And it's weird because it's almost like offensive in a way, and it's so counter to our nature for for someone to do something like that, so unexpected. And I always share with my youth kids that it's kind of like this. If someone were to come up and slap you in the face, at the end they apologize, how easy would it be for you to like accept that or just forgive them? I mean, it's hard, right?
Yeah.
And then if someone slapped you in the face, once every minute for 30 minutes, and it's coming again, sometime in between that gap, you just say, hey, you know what, I forgive you. I forgive you. Like, knowing very well that you're gonna get slapped in the face again. That's kind of like what Jesus did while we're in the act of sinning, while we're in the act of rejecting him, while we're in the act of even Peter, who, moments before he was put up on the cross, rejected him and said,
Right.
I don't even know you. That's someone of his best friends, and he had to have known that Peter was going, 3 times. And Jesus looked over at him and he's like, dude, what's going on? And then he goes up and dies, knowing that like there's going to be constant rejection of even his gift of life. To still go ahead and do that is so counter to our nature and like so incredibly, I don't know, mind-blowing.
And Paul points out in Philippians 2 that it's not even just that, it's that God, Jesus comes and he emptied himself of his status as God's son. It's for us. Yeah. So it's like stepping down into, when he's got all this freedom, he steps down and becomes obedient even to the point of death on the cross. Mm-hmm. Just so much sacrifice. It's not, it's when you look at the whole picture, it's yes, death on the cross, but also stepping into physicality, stepping into pain, stepping into experiencing loss and experiencing what it's like to live and do life in a broken world. Mm-hmm. So he can sympathize and empathize with us. He understands what it's like, and then he also gave his life. So it's it's a very big demonstration of God's love for us.
And hugely important during the Christmas season to remember, especially in this time where we're just, lacking hope.
Yep.
And to know that hope exists in a beautiful, powerful way, I think is very comforting.
Yeah.
So, that's all the time we have for today. But Branches, it is the Christmas season, so go out, spread the cheer, spread the love, and we will see you the next couple weeks for the conclusion of our Christmas season here at Branches.
Yep. Don't forget to register for Christmas Eve services online.
Yeah.
And if you plan to watch Christmas Eve service online, register for Christmas in a Box. Don't forget that. We got some special treats for you there.
It's going to be awesome.
It's going to be great.
Have a great week, guys.
Love you guys.